Well, he's going to get a third term. So Trump 28, Trump is going to be president in 28, and people just ought to get accommodated with that.
So what about the 22nd Amendment?
There's many different alternatives. At the appropriate time, we'll lay out what the plan is, but there's a plan, and President Trump will be the president in 28.
All right, folks, we have some ominous emergency breaking news that we have to talk about whether we like it or not. And the topic is a third Trump term. MAGA mastermind and Trump advisor Steve Bannon recently revealed to reporters that there is a concrete plan in place to permit Trump, or try to permit Trump, to run for an unconstitutional third term. So we need to sound the alarm. But before we unpack all that, if you end up liking this video and you want to support the channel, please be sure to hit the like, subscribe, and alert bells before you go. All right, friends, I've got a clip I've got to show you here. It's about a 3-minute segment of an interview with Steve Bannon, who is one of the more nefarious and brilliant masterminds of MAGA and somebody who's been in the Trump orbit for about 10 years. Now, just as a reminder, the 22nd Amendment of the Constitution explicitly prevents presidents from running for a third term or having a third term. It codified the Washingtonian standard established by President Washington of 2 terms. You can get 2 terms, consecutive, non-consecutive, it doesn't matter, but that's it. You get your 2. President FDR violated that tradition. It wasn't codified into law. It was the Washingtonian precedent and standard when he ran for 4 terms and got elected for 4 terms during the Great Depression and the Second World War. After that, Congress was like, we need to enshrine it in law what Washington established. Well, Bannon and Trump and others are wanting to get around that. And Trump has talked about, off and on, over the past year, wanting to get a third term. So let's watch this exchange between Steve Bannon and the reporters and dive into the reaction to it.
Well, he's going to get a third term. So Trump 28, Trump is going to be president in 28, and people just ought to get accommodated with that.
So what about the 22nd Amendment?
There's many different alternatives. At the appropriate time, we'll lay out what the plan is, but there's a plan, and President Trump will be the president in 28. We had longer odds in 16 and longer odds in 24 than we got in 28. And President Trump will be the president of the United States, and the country needs him to be president of the United States. We have to finish what we started. And the way we finish it through Trump, Trump is a vehicle. I know this will drive you guys crazy, but he's a vehicle of divine providence. He's an instrument. He's very imperfect. He's not churchy, not particularly religious, but he's an instrument of divine will. And
so again, this is what's interesting about Steve Bannon. So he's terrifying in his own way because he's very, very smart. He's very clever, okay? And he has shaped and influenced so much of MAGA. And he has an understanding of populism. He helped get right-wing populists elected in Europe after working directly in the Trump White House for the first term. Since then, he's had a more indirect behind-the-scenes role. He's not in the White House, but he is very much a MAGA mover and shaker, and he has helped shape the MAGA movement as much as most people, right? There are very few people who I would say, perhaps other than Trump himself, who have shaped MAGA as much as Steve Bannon. What's interesting is he'll casually acknowledge things that most MAGA won't do. Like, he's highly imperfect. He's highly imperfect. Like, he just casually threw that out. Most MAGA would have their assholes clenched in terror at the notion of even admitting that. Steve Bannon's like, yeah, he's not perfect. Far from perfect, but he is also a messianic figure. He's an instrument of divine will. That sort of language from somebody, because it's very cultish and very apocalyptic, and yet it leaves the mouth of somebody who seems eminently rational and cynical. The contrast there, the dissonance there is striking in a way that it's not when it comes from Marjorie Taylor Greene. Like, when Marjorie Taylor Greene speaks, you think, oh, okay, she's just batshit crazy. With Steve Bannon, you're like, well, he is kind of crazy, but also like disturbingly cynical and calculating. It's really weird.
you can tell this of how he's pulled this off. We need him for at least one more term, right? And he'll get that in 28.
You're not driving me crazy. I'm trying to understand the coherence of the things you've just told me in the last few minutes. On the one hand, you've said the Constitution is fit for purpose. Secondly, you've said that President Trump needs another term, even though the 22nd Amendment makes pretty clear that he cannot have another term.
Why does it make that clear?
Because he's on his 2nd term already.
At some point in time, we will make sure we go through, Zanny, and define all those terms. Okay?
But
So what he's talking about is using legalese, right? What does it mean by a 2nd term? What do each of the words mean, and parse it through in the most ridiculously pedantic way to try to benefit Trump? And remember, who is the body that is ultimately responsible for interpreting what the Constitution says under our current system? Well, according to our current understanding, it's the 6-3 conservative supermajority on the Supreme Court. And remember, Trump appointed 3 of the 6. And given the ages of Justice Alito and Thomas, it's very possible that by the end of Trump's second term, when this becomes a question, there will not only be a conservative supermajority, but a MAGA majority court. And that's terrifying.
Even if
We
you
would
find
define
a
all
way
those terms.
to undermine you will be undermining the spirit of that amendment, even if you find some way around it. And to those
Can the
people
American
who
people, if the American people, with the mechanisms we have, put Trump back in office, are the American people tearing up the Constitution?
Yes. Yes. If Donald Trump says, "Hey, listen, fuck the Constitution. I'm going to stay on the I'm going to stay in office. I'm going to run for a third term, even though the Constitution explicitly says otherwise," and the American people, 51% of them, let's say he still gets he wins the election by way of the Electoral College, and let's say not just a plurality of the popular vote, which is what he got last time. Finally, he never won the popular vote the other 2 times. He finally won the popular vote this past time, not with the majority, but a plurality. Let's say he runs again for a 4th time, right? Because he's ran for office 4 times. He's won twice, lost once. Let's say he wins this 3rd unconstitutional election. If he wins the popular and Electoral College vote, yes, I would still say that the American people are shredding the Constitution because the Constitution says you don't get a 3rd term. If the American people want to change that, they don't just vote for his illegal 3rd term run. They need to pass a new amendment. I think it would be the 28th Amendment, if I'm not mistaken, that would undo the 22nd Amendment and say, yeah, actually people can run for 3rd terms, in which case Barack Obama should run and kick Trump's ass, which he would in that election. But let's continue.
Would that be turning up?
Well,
Would the American people be going against the spirit of the Constitution, ma'am?
I think yes, actually, because I
You
think
say-
what you will end up with
So you're
is
saying the
a
American people-
populist justification for a quasi-dictatorship.
That's not true at all. Trump
That's what it sounds like.
It's not. Trump is a dictatorship. Did you just see the compromises he had to make on the big beautiful bill? You see the compromises he has to do on everything, on accommodating Zelensky, on what President Trump. President Trump is nothing but a series of negotiations to kind of keep this thing rolling forward, where he's having trade-offs all the time.
But
How
Steve,
can
you've just spent the last 20 minutes telling me we have to smash the other side. There's no room for debate. There's no room for compromise. We must smash them. And now you're telling me this is a negotiation. I mean, that's
No.
I guess that's why
on
it
his
seems to me some kind
policy.
of tension
First
there.
off, the only way President Trump wins in 2028 and continues to stay in office is by the will of the American people. Okay? And the will of the American people is what the Constitution embodies. And so
The Constitution provides parameters even to the will of the American people. Remember, we hear this all the time. We're not a democracy, we're a republic, right? We are a constitutional democratic republic. We're all 3 of these things. We're a democracy in that the people vote. We're a republic in the sense that people choose representatives to wield power. The 340 million Americans, we don't directly wield day-to-day power in the government. We elect people who do. That's the republic part. And the constitutional part is that we have a written supreme law which defines the parameters. And it is true that the will of the people can and should ultimately triumph over the Constitution if there's a conflict, but that's done via the amendment process. We don't do these things you don't defy the Constitution with a simple majority, even though I generally prefer a majoritarian rule. It's not absolute. You need some things which are done by supermajority, like a constitutional amendment, right? You need 2/3 of both chambers of Congress, and then you need 3/4 of the states to ratify a constitutional amendment. Then if you do that, then yes, you can change the Constitution to say whatever the fuck you want. But that's not what Steve Bannon is proposing. And by the way, when you talk about the will of the people cuts against Republicans all the time. You know, as much as people talk about the Democratic Party being losers, we're really not. We win elections as often as we lose them. We are competitive with Republicans despite their numerous institutional advantages, which makes you wonder what would things look like if we had a more balanced, political terrain, right? And so what happens when Democrats win elections, Steve? Is that the will of the people? Should you shut up? Should the rest of MAGA shut up and let Democrats just do whatever they want? Like, it has to cut both ways. And it doesn't. Because, again, he is a weaponized, very calculating, cynical hypocrite. But it is alarming. As HuffPost notes, huge crisis. Critics sound the alarm as Steve Bannon teases Trump 2028 plan. Again, this is the text of the Constitution. No person shall be elected to the office of president more than twice. No person who has held the office of president or has acted as president for more than 2 years of a term to which some other person was elected president shall be elected to the office of the president more than once. So, critics were quick to call him out on that. Okay, this is getting creepy, wrote Ruth Ben-Ghiat, an expert in authoritarianism and author of Strongman, Mussolini to the President. She added, quote, "In Strongman, I state that propagandists present autocrats' actions as, quote, sanctioned by a higher power and the fruit of divine blessing," which is, of course, what Bannon did here. Even if the constitutional issues were somehow resolved, Trump would turn 82 before Election Day in 2028. Let's see some of the other. Mehdi Hassan, friends of the show. Yep, not joking. Huge crisis coming our way, bigger than the current ones. Veterans for Responsible Leadership. Anyone still wondering why the No Kings movement is growing at lightning speed? Cameron Kasky, who's a Gen Z commentator, I think he's affiliated with the Bulwark, says, "I think I'm actually done downplaying the he's not going to leave conversation." Joshua Reed Equal, "If you don't take this seriously now, your kids will never forgive you." Alonzo Grimendi, "This will definitely be the most predictable and straightforward coup, and this is a coup, in the history of the Americas." Harry Sisson says, "Anyone that believes that Trump intends to leave office is not paying attention." John DeLillo, "I would love to be wrong, but they keep saying this in public. He's selling Trump 2828 merch. He's massively remodeling the White House as if it's his personal residence. I don't really see why the idea shouldn't be taken seriously just because it's unconstitutional." Martin Flanagan, "How crazy can the USA get? Trump is, quote, a vehicle of divine providence." They're saying the quiet part out loud, folks. After all we've endured, we'd be fools not to take this rhetoric seriously. And on and on. Larry Sabato, "Trump will seek a third term, says Steve Bannon, and the U.S. Constitution be damned." On and on and on and on and on and on and on. Hey, Wick TV, a liberal centrist moderator that I have frequently engaged. He was on there. So let's take a look at how Twitter's reacting. Steve Bannon insists Trump will serve a third term. Leftist Twitch streamer Hassan Piker says it's clear they're going to try to present this as the will of the people. Add to that some kind of martial law due to internal conflict or war in Latam, and you'll have fake elections and a permanently Turkified state. Sorry, he didn't capitalize any of this shit, which made it harder to read. Mehdi Hassan, again, they're literally shouting it out loud. They're planning to overturn the Constitution and democracy. They're not hiding it. They're bragging about it, and the media are just ignoring it, or worse, normalizing it. The biggest story perhaps in modern history. Joe Walsh, former Republican congressman, far-right Tea Party Republican congressman. Don't laugh at this. Don't dismiss it. They're serious. Prepare for it and get ready to fight against it. Adam Cochran saying, "Hi, this is called conspiracy against rights and conspiracy against the Constitution. It's a crime, and Trump's closest advisors are just saying this shit on tape. Trump is not eligible for a third term. No plans to make it so. No plan to make it legal. Attempting to do it is treason and overthrowing the United States. It cannot happen. It will not happen, and everyone should be willing to call it out." Marco Foster, who I played his clip. Yeah, this is indeed the puzzling part. If you're a political journalist, what could be a bigger story than a plot instigated by the president to end U.S. democracy? What possible journalistic reason can there not be to cover it? It's because they're feckless cowards who grade Trump on a curve, unfortunately. Trump is building himself a $350 million bunker with a ballroom on top of it for when he declares a state of emergency and cancels the 2028 elections to stay in power. Bannon is giving away the game. Well, Stancil, this is the biggest story in modern American history because it's the story of the end of America. The country's 250th birthday next year could be its last because Trump is openly planning to destroy the Constitution and stay in power forever. George Conway, "I have one slight disagreement with this post. There is at least one bigger story than that of a president instigating a plot to end U.S. democracy, and that is the story that the president is instigating his second plot to end U.S. democracy. Because, of course, as people point out, Trump tried to steal the last election, or rather the 2020 election. He tried to remain in power unlawfully by way of conspiracy, by way of fraud, by way of an actual insurrection. So this idea that it's out of the question for Trump to try again is bullshit. I don't know if he will actually try to do this. I know objectively that the chance is greater than 0% that he will try to do this. And given that he did go much further than any president in American history in 2020 to try to unlawfully remain in power, anybody who's just simply dismissing this out of hand is full of shit and needs to be made fun of. In the meantime, let me know what you think in the comments.